In this video, we're going to take a look at hair and fur. Hair and fur is a modifier for Max that we can apply to pretty much any object. So I'm just going to start by right-clicking and isolating the fairy mesh so that we can have a little bit more visual understanding of what's going on. So I'm going to go to my modifier list and we're going to apply hair and fur. It is a world space modifier. So as we put that on, you'll see it applies hair and fur to our entire mesh. Now, let's render one of these real quick. So as hair and fur applies to our mesh, you'll see it is covering the entire mesh and it is rather thick and definitely not what we want. So now we need to take a look at what's going on. First of all, we're going to go to the polygon subobject level here and we're going to grab a selection of polygons on the top of the head. So we're going to look around here, we're going to use control and we're going to add to this selection to get approximately the polygons that we want to use. Alright, that should work pretty well. So as soon as I have the selection set up there, I'm going to hit Update Selection. By doing that, we now confine the hair and fur to those selected polygons. Let's take a look at that. So if we were making a dandelion type fairy, that might work out pretty well, but I would say that's still not what we're going for. So let's get out of our selection there, and we're going to go to Style Hair. With the Style Hair tool, I get a brush, basically in my viewport, that as I move around, I can actually, inside this target shape, drag those hair splines, the guides around, and actually decide how that hair is going to look. Now, we're going to have an awful lot of hair out here in front of the face, so we've got some other tools here that allow us to do things like scaling the hair. So we'll scale the hair down in a lot of these spots, so that around the top and the front, let's just make it, that'll work. That's a little bit shorter in spots. We'll go back to translate and we'll start dragging this back down. So as we drag it down, we figure out exactly where we want it to go, or at least close to where we want it to go. We're going to have to use a couple other tools here in the styling engine to basically pull the hair back out of the mesh. So right now, we're going to look for puff roots. So right there is puff roots. So as I click and drag now, and I can bring down the size of the brush a bit, we're going to pull the hair back out of the mesh. So we're going to basically just kind of puff it up a little bit off the head, so that it's not sinking down into the mesh. We go back to translate, and we can pull it down on the side over here a bit. Now, as you can see, the guide shapes there are still quite a bit different than what the hair itself is actually doing. So right now, there are still some settings here that we haven't changed. So we're going to go down a little bit farther. So we're going to hit Finish Styling. I'm going to close up the styling parameter there for a minute. And if we look between the frizz parameters and the kink parameters, there's a little too much frizziness going on here. So if we decrease the amount of frizz at the root and the frizz at the tip, we're going to get that hair to push back down into those splines that we pushed around. So let's take a look at that. It's a little bit more like what we want. So let's zoom in there a little bit more. Alright, so it's not bad. It's getting a little bright. It's getting a little bit of highlights that look pretty good, but overall the hair's a bit bright and a bit kind of edgy. So if we go back and look over here, our hair segments is only set to 5. As we increase the number of hair segments, that's the number of basically steps that will be along the length of the hair splines. So as we increase that, we'll get much smoother hair. The hair count, it's a default number that it thinks about as far as the number of polygons that were selected and about the amount of hair that should be on that number of polygons. If we look down farther here, we can see the only amount of hair that's actually showing in our viewport is only 2% of the actual hair that's going to be rendered. So between those settings, we can kind of guesstimate about what that's going to look like. We also have within the material parameters our tip and root color. So let's take and make our root color a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. And then we'll take the tip color, make it a bit more saturated. And let's render one more. Alright, so that's a little bit better for now. In the next video, we're going to talk about actually using just a scalp object. Because what we'll see is that while we have this hair and fur on my entire object, when I want to go back and maybe make an adjustment to any other part of the mesh, as soon as I do that, the hair and fur is going to kind of get broken. So if I change any of the polygon structure below here, the polygons that are selected where the hair is supposed to grow from will change. So this isn't always the best way to work. It works, and especially if we're going to grow hair out of the entire mesh, like if we've got a little fuzzy teddy bear or dog kind of thing, growing hair out of the entire mesh is going to be just fine. But with an object like this, where we want to grow hair at a very specific area, there's other ways to work. So we'll get into that in the next video.